Hello, Mr. Guralnick.
Hi, this is Peter.
Peter. Hi, Peter. How are you doing?
Good, thanks. And you are Oder, or how do you pronounce it?
My name is Odair.
Odair. Okay.
Yeah, it's a name a little bit strange. uh, but well, just 1 second. Well, let's go. I'd like to say that is an honor to talk to you. I'm a big fan. I have your books here. It's
Right. Yeah.
and I myself wrote a book about Elvis. A little book. It's just
Just pull it back a little bit so I can see it.
yeah.
Oh,
I wrote a little book about him, inspired by you,
oh,
and it's a big honor to talk to you.
well, no, it's great to talk to you, and I'm sure it was inspired by your own, dedication and interests and ideas. So, is it about your book? Is it about anything, any theme in particular, or?
My book is about his life in music.
Mhm.
I took off all his personal life and I focused just in his music.
From beginning to end?
Yeah, from beginning to end. Yeah, I'm a Elvis fan too. Well, first of all, I would like to talk a little bit about the book specific. I have it here. It's really wonderful. It's a beauty, and I'm
so glad to have it out in Brazil, and it's very exciting to me.
It's the first time. It's the first time your book is published here in Brazil. Is released here in Brazil, and I don't know how it took too long to come to Brazil. It's incredible.
Let me close. Am I washed out in the video?
No, it's okay.
Okay, because I've got a window that I could close the curtain.
Just a little bit, but not that, not it's not a problem.
Yeah, wait, I'm going to try one more. Is that a little better?
Oh yeah, better.
Oh, okay, good.
Better. Yeah. I'd like to know a little bit first a little bit about the book specific. I would like to know how long you took to write the book and how many interviews you made for the first book.
Well, it's hard to separate out the interviews from for the first book and the second book.
Oh yeah.
I was going all the time. It took 11 years for the two books together. I started in January of 1988. I went to the Elvis birthday celebration because Colonel Parker was speaking there, and he had no contact to speak of with the, the Elvis world in quite some time. And so I went and I thought, well, at least I can absorb the aura of Colonel Parker. And I sat with Sam Phillips. Maybe you know all this now, and I'll get back to your question. But I sat with
no problem.
I sat with Sam Phillips and his family, and then Sam decided to go over and say hello to the Colonel, whom we hadn't seen in years. And so I joke about it. I say, being the good journalist that I am, I sort of traipsed along behind him. But I was really kind of very embarrassed, but I went. And then I subsequently wrote to the Colonel and then got invited to his birthday party. But that's sort of irrelevant. But the point is, that was when I actually began, and I finished in 99. Now I did hundreds of interviews. Hundreds, yeah. I can't really number them, but people like Scotty Moore, whom I had met originally in 76. And he didn't do interviews much, and he was reluctant to sort of do more. But he agreed, and I just talked to him over and over again. I mean, we became good friends. And I did the same with Jerry Schilling, for example, with the second volume. And people like Knox Phillips and Sam Phillips. I mean, all kinds of people that I would talk to over and over again. But yeah, I would say hundreds of people. and some multiple of that for the interviews. But I don't know. I can't tell you how many for each book because I was just running.
Okay,
I was running from pillar to post.
Yeah, and what drive you to write a book about Elvis? Why you chose Elvis?
Well, I had really, my original passion had been for the blues. When I was 15 or 16, I just fell into the blues, and I can't give you a reason for it. And but it opened up the world to every other kind of music that I came to write about, to country, to soul, to gospel, but also to Elvis, whom I had certainly been aware of through his, popular records. But it was only subsequent to my sort of discovery of the blues that I found that, well, actually it was only after that the albums, Date with Elvis and For LP Fans Only, I think I had them reversed, came out with the sun sides on them, and they had Mystery Train and That's All Right. I had never heard those before. And by the time I heard Elvis singing them, I had heard the originals already. I had heard Arthur Crudup, I had heard Little Junior Parker, I had heard Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf, who were inspirations to him. And that was more than anything. It was just kind of got me to understand about the origins of music. Now you ask why write about Elvis? Well, it was really, I started writing about music, all these underground newspapers, weeklies, alternative weeklies started springing up in 67, 68. And I began to write for some of them about blues. But I wrote about soul, strictly about the things I was passionate about. And I wrote about Elvis in 67 when it was very uncool to do that in an alternative weekly called the Boston Phoenix. And I wrote about him then because of these 3 singles that he had put out at that time, Guitar Man, US Mail, and what was the third? But they were all blues centered kind of. And I wrote about how exciting it was to see him return to his roots. And then in 68, I wrote about the special, which just knocked me out. And in 69, I wrote the review for Rolling Stone from Elvis in Memphis. And so I wrote about him, and I wrote the chapter in the Rolling Stone Illustrated History of Rock and Roll because it was all about the music. That's the only thing that motivated me. But the thing is, I had written these things, and they were theoretical. They were in my mind. And I just, and I thought, well, all right, I've said all I have to say. I mean, I can theorize all I want, but so what? And then in 87, I wrote the script for a documentary, which eventually I took my name off. But it was a good documentary, but it was just, we reached a parting of the ways. But in the course of doing that, I got access. Remember, this is pre-internet, before you could get anything and everything you wanted. And I got access for the first time to the interviews that Elvis had done in 55 and 56, and then to some extent in 60 and 62. And I just suddenly thought, Elvis can speak for himself. He doesn't, and it became clear to me, clearer and clearer. He spoke so eloquently and talked about the music and the inspirations for his music and the Statesman and Arthur Big Boy Crudup. And that wasn't all he talked about, but basically, and I, at the same time, and you probably know this anecdote, I was driving around South Memphis with a friend of mine, Rose Clayton, who had grown up in South Memphis. And we were down by where Stax Records was. And there was a boarded up drugstore on the corner. And she said, that's where Elvis's cousin Gene used to work. And Elvis used to come in and wait for him to get off work. And he would sit at the counter and be drumming his fingers on the counter. And she said, poor baby, And I just thought, wow, that's it. This kid with pimples and on his neck and this, but I thought, this is a real person. That's who I want to write. And those 2 things were really the biggest inspiration that I had. Just the idea that you could write not about the myth, not about what everybody had written about before, but to try to bring out something of the real person and what had inspired him in the music. And that's what I set out to do.
All right. And you said it was in 67, it was uncool to write about Elvis. Do you think that it happened because of the movies, the soundtracks? why wasn't cool to write about him?
I guess that probably would be it. I mean, I didn't really care what was cool, but the point was when I wrote about Muddy Waters or Howlin' Wolf or Bo Diddley or even Jerry Lee Lewis, these were all figures who were, enjoyed a great deal of, I don't want to say popularity, but cachet, or but with Elvis, it was almost people saw him in Double Trouble or Harum Scarum or something. They had dismissed him as something, and I mean, it wasn't. I knew there was more. I didn't have any hesitation about writing him. It just that at that time, it was not somebody that people were seeking out. And I mean, I wrote the first three things I wrote were about James Brown, Howlin' Wolf, and Jerry Lee Lewis. And right after that, I wrote about Elvis Presley. But I mean, it was mostly Black subjects with some of the early, I guess, blues-based rock and roll or rockabilly figures. But no, it was just funny. I mean, it like I say, I don't mean to make a big deal of it. It wasn't, I wasn't on a crusade any more than, I am now. If I tell you that, There Will Be Blood by Paul Thomas Anderson, that's the kind of movie I like, as opposed to these blockbuster movies or superhero. I understand people like all kinds of things, but that's what I like, and that's what I've always written. All that I've ever written, and I feel fortunate in this, I've never written on assignment. I've always written about something that excites me personally, that I'm passionate about. And I've been able to do that, and I do feel very fortunate. But that's what I've pursued, all of my life and all of my. And it's been great. It's been very rewarding for me, and I hope for the reader too.
Sure. And of all the people you interviewed for the books, who you think it's the most interesting? Is there one person that astonishing you, that made you, wow, these people, this guy, this woman is incredible?
Well, I think of the people I've interviewed. And I didn't ever interview Elvis, so I can't say about it.
Sure.
But I would say Sam Phillips, Solomon Burke, even Jerry Lee Lewis. Not so much for the interviews. He's just such a brilliant person, and his music is so expressive and so explosive. And I would say, having first interviewed him in 1970 and maybe interviewed him most recently 2 years ago, he's always been of great interest. And Howlin' Wolf would be another person. So those are kind of the people but Sam Phillips and Solomon Burke, in terms of just the brilliance of the interviews themselves. And I'll tell you one other person that you might not think of is Sam Cooke's mentor and kind of a business partner, J.W. Alexander, who was just an astonishing person, and a person of astonishing acuity and intellect and knowledge, going way back in all of the forms of Black music, of African-American music. And to a large extent, many of these people, not all of them by any means, but many of them became good friends over the years. I mean, I treasured the associations that I had, but I was so grateful for their willingness of so many people, of Sam Cooke's brother L.C. or Bobby Womack or J.W., to open up worlds for me that otherwise I wouldn't have had access to. Scotty Moore did the same things. So did Sam Phillips. But if I hadn't been, if I were interviewing you, I wouldn't just ask you this one question about the book. I would be really interested in who you are, where you come from, where your name comes from. What started you off, like you're asking me. And I tried to be respectful towards all the people that I interviewed. I mean, it wasn't a hard thing for me to do, but and I tried to show them the admiration that I had for their work and the respect that I had for it, and to explore much more than, let's say, if I talked to James Blackwood, it was another just fascinating interview, and he was so generous in sort of describing to me the whole history of white quartet singing, which I really didn't know much about. I knew a lot more about Black gospel than I did about the white quartet singing. And he was very patient and extremely helpful. But I was interviewing, not You Knew Elvis. That wasn't the interview. The interview was just about his whole life and work. And I felt like,
Mhm.
you know, you owe the person that kind of respect, I guess.
Mhm. And you knew back in the day you Elvis was a cool guy, a cool musician.
Oh, yeah.
Did you pay attention in his work when you were a kid?
Well, I did, yeah. But I mean, it wasn't initially, it wasn't the popular songs. I was totally aware of all the songs that were hits. I mean, they were all around me. I was 12 when Heartbreak Hotel came out, you know,
Mhm.
when the early hits came out, when Hound Dog came out. And, but it was when I was 15 or 16, and I was knocked out by Little Richard, for example, at the same time. But it was when I was 15 or 16 and suddenly discovered the blues, just fell into it with a friend of mine named Bob Smith. And he and I just got so passionate about it. And honestly, that led me to Elvis and to recognize how deep his roots went and what the background was for Little Richard's music. I mean, I don't mean that I knew it all. I still don't know it all, but you know, and for Elvis's music. And it was totally exciting to discover that. But over the years, it was the music that continued to motivate me. So, for example, I know that John Lennon had that famous quote about Elvis died when he went into the army. And yet, to me, probably Elvis's greatest sessions were when he got out of the army. I mean, I would never, you know, I would never discount or do away with the Sun sessions, which are just almost magical, I think.
Yeah.
But his greatest sessions were the Elvis is Back sessions. I mean,
Elvis is back.
yeah, and he came back with so much ambition. Came back with the intention to encompass such a broad range of music. And those were cool. And it also with greater control over his voice, which he had really worked to expand while he was in the army, while he was in Germany with Charlie Hodge. So things like that, I would never have been open to when I first, you know, became interested in Elvis, when I just knew don't be cruel or don't, you know, too much or, you know, whatever. But more and more, for instance, the ballads that he did with Don Robertson, and I mean, that Don Robertson had written, or that Doc Pomus and Mort Schumann had written. A song like I Need Somebody to Lean On from Viva Las Vegas, to me, is just such an extraordinarily, such a beautifully sung and extraordinarily interpreted song. And it has nothing to do with, from my point of view, I don't care about Viva Las Vegas, about the, you know, the movie. And and again, I mean, people may love it, and I'm not knocking it or anything, but that wasn't what drew me in. It was that song, and actually the dream sequence that surrounds it is quite extraordinary too. But the song, I think, lives as, or if you watch him and listen to him sing If I Can Dream from the 68 special, and you see the passionate dedication that he brings to the music, just the outpouring of emotion that comes from him with that song. So but most of all, I think this has more to do with what you were asking. I came to see him right from the start, from the time, you know, I started writing about him, from the time that I, you know, and as a centerpiece of Last Train to Memphis, as a totally self-determined artist, a creative artist whose work came from his own passion for the music, his own dedication to it, his own knowledge of it, and the extent to which he made these choices, the creative choices that every artist makes, whether they're writing or, you know, whether it's in writing or in music or whatever it's in. And I felt like that was what I wanted to convey most of all, because people so often dismissed him as somebody who was a tool of somebody else. I mean, and he wasn't. He was somebody who set out to express himself in music, and who obviously achieved it to a degree, you know, that parallels the achievements of any great artist.
You had a chance to watch an Elvis concert. Yeah, which one?
I saw him.
More than one.
I saw him in Boston in 1971, and that was when he first started touring extensively. And he was very enthusiastic. I mean, I've learned from writing the book how enthusiastic he was. In later years, he wasn't that enthusiastic, and he was totally, involved in it and totally excited about it. And for me, it was an exciting event. I guess I would stress the word event, because as a musical experience, it was like a tableau almost. And you know, he would strike the karate poses. It wasn't that it was fake or phony or anything like that. And it was thrilling for me. I rode the streetcar in to the Boston Garden where he was appearing, and every single person on the streetcar was going to the concert, and you felt like you were part of. I never felt like that before. Like I was part of this family with this common interest, and it was exciting to see him, and it was thrilling to hear him do "Funny How Time Slips Away" at the end with James Burton playing dobro, and he sang "Gotta Go Now," and you know, and the audience goes no, no, you know, and but I honestly, and this is maybe this is heresy, but I was never impelled to see him again, because I didn't want to see a kind of static performance. I mean, what I wanted to do was to see him the way I saw all of the people that I saw, Jerry Lee Lewis, Muddy Waters, in a small club. I wanted to see him at the, you know, a small club in Memphis in 1955, or just, you know, in a situation where you don't know what the music is going to turn into, where it's, and which was what was always so exciting to me about seeing Howlin' Wolf, one of the greatest performers I ever saw, or somebody like Sleepy LaBeef, who's not anywhere near as well known, but it would be like he'd be in this small club and he would lift the roof off. The audience would just rise up with him, and that was what was thrilling, and that was different from seeing. I just never went to many big shows, and they weren't of any great interest to me. But I wouldn't give up having seen Elvis that one time and seen him so committed to his performance, but I wasn't motivated to see it again.
Do you have an Elvis, a favorite Elvis song?
Well, you know, there are so many. I mean, you know, it would be hard to say, you know, Mystery Train is one of my favorites, or Reconsider Baby, for example, is a great favorite. But or I Need Somebody to Lean On, or I was just listening to the Elvis's Back album the other day, and what an extraordinary range of music there is on that. But I you know, I often think that one of the songs that I love the most is Trying to Get to You. And I think about, and it was a song he clearly loved, and it had a spiritual element to it, even though it wasn't a spiritual song, and he sang it all his life. He sang it right up till the end. But what has always struck me is, you know, he recorded it at Sun and never got a finished version of it. I mean, it was released on his first album, and that was the first time I heard it, and I was just destroyed by it then. But it has always struck me what I would really, if I were to pick out one song that was my favorite, it would be the take after the take that was released, the final take that he never got to make. I think it probably it might have slowed down a little. Sam Phillips had a great belief in sort of a retarded beat, in keeping the beat back. So you're just always on the verge of, and I feel like it would have gotten more of that, but still the released version is sensational. But I have a question for you. Is Elvis playing piano, you know, an almost inaudible piano on Trying to Get to You?
If Elvis was playing piano?
Well, what I'm saying is he on the take that was released? I mean, you can hear a few notes like piano.
I'm not sure about that.
Well, I asked Sam Phillips, and he listened, and we listened together. And see, Elvis is not playing rhythm guitar, which he would ordinarily do, and there are sounds there which I you know, if he was playing piano, Sam Phillips had the mic far away from where he was, you know, from the piano, but it's sort of an interesting thing, because he'd love to play piano, and you hear him in lots of situations. You hear him. I'm trying to think what. Well, I mean, for instance, on that Hollywood session in September of '56, and you hear him on Old Shep, but you hear him on several other songs. So.
Yeah, and in '77 he played piano in the Unchained Melody. Unchained Melody.
Yeah. No, which again is just what an amazing musical moment that is, as difficult as it is, and as grotesque as he looks. but the look on his face when he hits that high note, you know.
He was really happy.
Yeah, yeah, no, and the music still can carry you away and carry him away, which again, to come back to the motivation why I write about Elvis, that's why, because he's a great artist.
Would you have a favorite Elvis phase?
Phase, you mean a period of time?
Period, yeah.
You know, to me, there are several different periods.
Yeah.
There are the sun, you know, there's the sun years, which are almost unparalleled. And where I think the music that he's making, I would defy anyone who, from the evidence of his ears or her ears, you know, could say it's this kind of music, it's that kind of music. It isn't any kind of music except Elvis music. I mean, it's not rock and roll. Is it folk music? Is it rock and roll? Rhythm and blues? Is it, you know, people choose to listen to things almost from an ideological perspective. And so some people will say, oh, it's the birth of rock and roll. Some people will say, oh, he's, you know, culturally appropriated. It's totally original, I think. And it is what it is. And it is what you hear. So there's that. It's like I said to you, though, in those first 2 or 3 years after he got back from the army, when he made his first gospel album, when he made the Elvis is Back album, when he recorded all these ballads, where I think he became much more of an interpretive artist than he had been before, that's a favorite period. And then from, let's say, from 67 or so to 69, when he was putting out those singles, what is it, U.S. Mail, you know, Guitar Man, Big Boss Man, and he put out those singles, and then there was the television special, and then there were the Memphis recordings. I mean, that to me is an amazing, you know, period of time. It's like a renaissance, you know, for Renaissance.
Yeah, sure, for sure, sure.
So all of those are, you know, are key periods to me. And it's, I mean, I don't mean to make it into something dry and uninteresting. You know, I'll listen to each of those. I mean, you know, I vary. Yesterday I was listening to Howlin' Wolf's first recordings, or, you know, another day I'll listen to Paul Kelly, the soul singer. But I'll listen to all of those, or Merle Haggard, but I'll listen to all of those with great enthusiasm, and I'm always excited. How about you? What's your favorite?
I like the 68 comeback special. I really love that period. I really love the American Studio period. When he recorded Suspicious Minds, Power of My Love, Long Black Limousine.
I really love, you know. It's just,
yeah.
What about the one the ashtrays are all filled with, you know, ashes? What song is that? The floor needs a touch up off the mark or something. I can't think of the name, but that's from the 69 too.
I really love the Sun period. It's amazing. It's fantastic. I really love and just the guitar. It's incredible. And you met Colonel Parker. I would like you to talk a little bit about him, because he's such a mysterious figure, mysterious person. And who was this guy? He was nice to you. It was fun to talk to him. He was a cool guy, a cool person. Who was he, in your vision?
Well, as we know, he was born and bred in the Netherlands, and you know, came to this country 3 times actually. The last time he joined the army, but he was drawn. This is the world he wanted to enter into, and he was able to pass himself off as Thomas Andrew Parker without anyone ever thinking of his having been born anywhere but America. He's at Huntington, West Virginia. One of the things that's interesting, I'm doing a book on Colonel Parker now. And
you're doing a book about him?
Yeah, and I should qualify that by saying 75% of the book is in his words. It's in his words, because it's through the letters. And so, and the letters give a window into the kind of person he was. And not the letters to me. I mean, the letters to me were thrilling, you know, but the letters that he writes are so eloquent. They're so smart. They're so funny. And they're occasionally so vulnerable. The letters he writes to Elvis are just absolutely amazing in terms of his identification and with and love for Elvis, and a shared love. So I think the picture that the world has gotten of him is quite, and the other thing that has really been brought home forcefully to me is that until 1960, 61, 62, he was almost universally admired in the business. And he was written about in all, not just in Billboard or Cashbox, but in the mainstream publications like Time Magazine, or, you know, Newsweek, as a character, true, but as someone who was written about of, you know, of remarkable intelligence, resourcefulness, and ability. And obviously, that's not the reputation that he had in later years, and it's not because he changed. I think to some extent, I mean, this is my theory and may or may not be true, but I think that as Elvis changed and as Elvis became more and more disaffected, not from him so much as from Elvis's life changed considerably. And if there was to be criticism, the Colonel fulfilled the role of manager that he felt was set out for the manager, which is the manager never blames the artist. The manager takes all the blame himself. In addition to which, the guys around Elvis, many of whom I know and many of whom I'm friendly with, it was almost universally, and with the exception of someone like Jerry Schilling, who I think has a broader perspective, but they almost universally took the view that the Colonel had corrupted Elvis, was blocking Elvis, was this and that. And one of the reasons I think they were so negative about both the Colonel and Vernon Presley was because both the Colonel and Vernon saw them as freeloaders and did their best to get Elvis either to rein them in or to cut them off. So you can understand it. It doesn't speak badly of them. I don't think they were freeloaders, but I think, but they have spoken so often about what the Colonel did, the reasons he did it, without ever having been in the room. Nobody was ever in the room. Nobody ever knew what the deals were except for Elvis, Vernon, and the Colonel. And so what I want to do is in this book, is to reveal what was going on behind the scenes through the Colonel's letters, which are really extensive and eloquent, and through a long biographical portrait that I want to write at the front of the book, maybe 35 or 40,000 words. I mean, similar to the book I did on Robert Johnson, which was, you know, a standalone book. So, but you know, I'm not trying to win anybody over, and I'm not trying to be a defender, but I think that people will be amazed when they see how different the Colonel was from his image. So that's what I hope, anyway.
Colonel Parker is a very villainized guy.
Yeah. Yes.
You don't think he's a villain at all, right?
No, I don't. But I guess the most pertinent thing I should say in relation to your question on Last Train is that when the Colonel first encountered Elvis, you remember, Colonel heard of Elvis at the beginning of 1955. By January 20th, I think, he went to 55, he went down to the Hayride to see him. Within a week, or maybe it was even before then, he had set up a tour for Elvis. Within 6 months, he had focused on the fact that this was somebody of the kind of talent that he thought couldn't be contained, and he was determined. Now you say, oh, poor Bob Neal or something, but the point I think I should make in terms of your question is it was Elvis who sought out the Colonel. I mean, the Colonel saw in Elvis almost unparalleled potential, and not just the potential to make money. The Colonel saw him as an unparalleled talent. He saw him, I mean, and that's how he started out writing to people about Elvis and selling him to people who didn't want to buy it. But more than anything, in that relationship, the Colonel was a superstar. He had been the manager of Eddie Arnold. who was the biggest star in country music until Garth Brooks, and bigger than Garth Brooks for that time. He was the manager of Hank Snow, the #1 star in country music, when he first saw Elvis. Elvis wanted more than anything to find a national platform. He saw Sun Records, whatever you and I might think, and he was only 19 years old, but or 20 years old at this point. Whatever you and I might think, he didn't want to stay on Sun Records. He saw them as not having national distribution. He saw the Colonel as offering him a path to the kind of broad audience, to the national audience that he sought. And from his point of view, his being able to interest the Colonel was the greatest good fortune that he could ever encounter. And you probably remember that when he signed the RCA contract, he wrote to the Colonel, "I love you like a father. You know, you have been just the best to me." Sent him a telegram. And Elvis wasn't that big on writing, so it was very meaningful. And I've got other letters where he's writing to the Colonel, and they share all these both jokes, and they share a common perception that they are venturing forth into these worlds, like the world of Hollywood when he starts making movies, where people look down on them, each of them for different reasons, but look down on them as kind of hillbillies, as just these interlopers. And you have people like Hal Wallace and his partner Joe Hazen, particularly Joe Hazen, who think we're going to put these people in their place. And Elvis and the Colonel share the joke that no, they're not going to put us in our place. We're going to put them in their place, and that's what happened. But that was a shared perception. And for instance, the fact that Elvis generally referred to the Colonel as Admiral, not as Colonel, sort of shows the joke that they shared.
People say Elvis in '77, Elvis was about to fire the Colonel. Do you think is it true? It's true?
No, I mean, I think that Elvis was so lost in '77 that I don't think he could have said what he was intending to do. I mean, he had been suffering from such severe depression for, I would say, 4 years at this point. Now, I'm not posing as a psychiatrist or a psychologist, but you can look at his behavior, and people want to talk. I mean, to me, one could look at this from one's own personal experience. It's, people say, oh, the drugs, the pills, the this or that. They're a symptom of something, but that's not the cause. I mean, the cause was, for whatever the reason, it was just a lack of fulfillment. But he did fire. He fired the Colonel in August, or the end of August, beginning of September for '73, at the end of that Las Vegas engagement. And they went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And the Colonel said, essentially, Elvis kind of fired him. And the Colonel kind of said, "You can't fire me, I quit." And and I've got letters about that too. Letters are going back and forth. And in the end, if you were to ask me my opinion, if Elvis had been straighter at the time, if Elvis had had more of a sense of what he wanted to do, he might well have been better off setting his own course at that point. Their partnership, like many marriages, had gone on for too long at that point. And I mean, for example, I wrote about a book about biography of Sam Cooke, and Sam Cooke at every stage in his life absorbed everything he could from the person he was dealing with, from you, from me, from whoever, and then he moved on. I mean, both he and Elvis were people of great intellect, but Sam Cooke was a lot more disciplined. And I would say after 10 years, Elvis might have said, hey, just as Eddie Arnold did with Colonel Parker, Elvis might have said, you and I are in different places now. I really admire everything you've done for me. I admire you. I understand. And I don't feel any less close to you, but I want to go on to do something else. But Elvis wasn't that kind of person. And it might have been better off if he had been. And but he wasn't. In the one place where he was entirely self-determined was in his music. And there he was focused. And particularly, when he was younger, he just was never, he wasn't going to be moved to do anything but what he wanted to do, to his credit. So no, I think that, you know, in 77, it's impossible to say what Elvis would have done, but I don't think he had any plan to quit the Colonel. The Colonel seemed to have more of a plan to sell his contract if he could have, but both of them had a deep commitment to the other. The Colonel had a deep love for Elvis, which, being the kind of person he was, you know, he showed a gruff exterior, but he expressed that love again and again. And I don't think neither one of them, it's like that song, neither one of us could be the first to say goodbye, and neither one of them could say goodbye.
Do you think it's true Elvis never made concerts, international concerts, because Colonel was afraid to, because Colonel was a legal immigrant? Do you think it's true?
I think that it's quite likely that Colonel at a certain point recognized that he couldn't go abroad. It didn't stop him from going to Canada, for example, where in later years he would have had to present a passport, which he didn't have. I think in the early years, though, he was talking, one of his proteges was a guy named Lee Gordon, who was originally from Detroit. This is Colonel met him in 57 and did the Hawaii concert with him, but they were talking quite seriously about Elvis going to Australia. Lee Gordon is a fascinating character and a great entrepreneur who died young, killed himself, I think in 63 or 64. But I think in 57, it hadn't occurred to the Colonel that he wouldn't be able to go to Australia. I mean, the world was not the way it is now, and I think that he thought he could just apply for it. And he had very powerful friends. After his brother came over to see him from the Netherlands in 61, and it was widely spread, not in this country, but in Holland, that he was Dutch. That may have been inhibiting. But you asked about, you know, Elvis doing tours abroad. Tom Hewlett was the guy who, with the Colonel, ran Elvis's tours for Management 3. He was a partner of Jerry Weintraub's. He was the one who originally had Management 3, and he was the person who knew the business. Jerry Weintraub supplied some of the money and most of the pizzazz, you know, the glamour or whatever. But the person who did all the work was Tom Hewlett, and he worked very closely with the Colonel. I don't think Colonel would have had any inhibitions about sending Elvis to Europe or to Japan with Tom Hewlett, who had taken all these other groups abroad, and who could certainly have done it. But the Colonel always cited security concerns, and people thought, oh well, you know, he's just making excuses. But I talked quite a bit with Tom Hewlett, and the reason Tom Hewlett was not, and I think this is the real reason, is that Elvis could not, and also I don't think Elvis wanted to do it. This is what Priscilla told me, but that's, I mean, the guys all think that he did want to do it. I didn't talk to Elvis, who knows? But I think that most of all, he couldn't have gone abroad. He couldn't have traveled in Europe or Japan without his medications, without his doctors, and to some extent without his guns. I mean, these were like, what do you call it? Security blankets, you know? And so, and Tom Hewlett recognized that if he were to go abroad, forget the guns, that's probably irrelevant, but that it would be a huge problem, not so much in terms of Elvis, protecting Elvis in terms of conventional security, but actually protecting Elvis from, you know, being busted the way Paul McCartney had been, the way Frank Sinatra had been.
Really?
And so I in Australia, wow. Yeah. And so, and that I think was the real reason that Elvis couldn't go abroad, was just that he, and that's what Tom Hewlett spoke pretty frankly about. And he had no axe to grind. He was a very loyal person and a very, very capable tour manager and tour director. He knew the business through and through. But I think that I think is the real reason.
Wow. If Elvis had survived What kind of singer do you think he would be in the 80s, in the 90s?
I think let's posit that I don't mean posit P-O-S-I-T, postulate, theorize that Elvis, came back from the Depression, that he straightened himself out, that he was just in better, in a better head. And I think what would have served his purposes best, both musically and from the standpoint of just his life, would have been to have returned to gospel music. And
Gospel.
and to have really set a different course. And it may not have been as much of a money-making course as his pop career, but it's hard to sustain a pop career past a certain point. I think that would have given him enormous satisfaction, both musically and personally. And I think it's likely, from his interest in, what was the last gospel album? Was it He Touched Me, maybe? That come out around 73.
Yeah, maybe.
And he was sort of exploring new gospel writers and new gospel forms. And I think, that's something he would have taken great satisfaction in exploring and discovering, and maybe taking his audience with him. So that's where I think his greatest satisfaction would have come from, both musical and personal.
Today we see a lot of people questioning Elvis' talent and abilities, and there is a kind of a revision about his legacy, trying to decrease its importance. Do you think the new generation is unable to notice, to realize Elvis' importance?
I think the thing is that if you listen with your ears and your heart, you'll hear what there is in the music of Elvis, of Sam Cooke, of Robert Johnson. If you're listening in terms of contemporary modes, whether they're ideological modes or they're stylistic modes, you listen to Robert Johnson, you say, oh, I'd rather hear listen to Eric Clapton. Well, Eric Clapton wouldn't. He'd rather listen to Robert Johnson. I mean, I'm trying to compare the two. And with Elvis, from the very first time he started recording, his music reached people through the power of his voice. I mean, it was like Jake Hess, the gospel singer for the Statesmen, great singer. Like Roy Hamilton, a singer of probably greater range, let's say, than Elvis, a more virtuosic singer. But he said the thing about Elvis was there might be better singers. He said, but that didn't matter. You couldn't find anybody who put himself more into a song than Elvis did, whether in the recording or in person. And that was what came across. And this is Jake Hess talking. That's what came across to his audience from the start. It was just, Jake Hess described it. It was almost as if, and Jake Hess recorded with him, I think, one time in the, if the Lord wasn't walking by my side, that gospel session, the second gospel. Mm-hmm. It must have been How Great Thou Art, those sessions. But he said, but he wasn't describing the recording process. He was just describing how Elvis, when he sang a song, it was almost as if he would close his eyes. And he was there, he was inside the song. And that's what came across. And that's what I think still comes across, if people listen with their ears and they don't, if you watch a movie, for example, and a lot of kids are simply not going to watch a movie in black and white. They're not interested in it. Mm-hmm. You watch a Preston Sturges movie, you watch an Ernst Lubitsch movie, and if you take it, you say, well, that's old fashioned because it's in black and white or it's the style of it, then you're missing out on something. You're missing out on Shakespeare, you're missing out on whatever. And so yeah. I think what the music that Elvis made was of such significance and importance and impact that to anybody who listens, as with any artist, and there's a whole range of them, Hank Williams, you could talk about, and there's contemporary artists, the same thing. And you could say Prince, or you don't want to limit it to Aretha Franklin. But I mean, the point is, if you listen, you'll hear it. But if you come into it with a sort of prejudice that it has to be this way or that way, I mean, for example, people talk about cultural appropriation, and you think about something like Elvis recording Arthur Crudup's That's All Right. Well, he recorded a song that had never been much of a hit to begin with, that had been recorded 8 years earlier. Who's he taking advantage of there? The only person who can benefit from it is Arthur Crudup.
And he was raised with that song, with that kind of music, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it would never have occurred to him or to anybody else. I mean, when Jimmy Rogers, the father of country music, you know, what he's best known for are his blues, his blue yodels. And he took an enormous amount from Black music, and he gave an enormous amount back. When I talked to Howlin' Wolf, he said, you know, Jimmy Rogers was one of the most, you know, you couldn't find a more, unregenerate blues singer than Howlin' Wolf, a person who gave voice more to just pure African-American expression, and yet he would call Jimmy Rogers one of his primary influences. I just think that people, you know, you have to look at music as something, once it's been released into the air, it's everybody's, and it goes all around. I mean, once you had the invention of sort of means of mass dissemination, once you had the invention of radio and the phonograph, no corner of the earth was so isolated that it wasn't influenced by, you know, by the world at large. And all those sounds went into the makeup. You have somebody like the Carter family, and they're influenced by blues. And you couldn't have a pure expression of the hillbilly tradition, but they're influenced by that, just as blues singers were influenced. You know, somebody like Bobby Blue Bland or Rufus Thomas, you know, spoke about how much country music had influenced them. So I think that's maybe I've gone all around the mulberry bush for you. But you know, but that, I guess that's what I think anyway.
Yeah. Do you think Elvis had any notion about his legacy and his importance?
Yeah, I think he did. I think when he felt good about himself, he did. You know, we all have a good days and bad days. And so when you're down, you don't really think that much about it. But no, I think he took his music very seriously, and he did everything he could to give his all to it. And at the end, he really wasn't able to. I mean, after about 73, he was more and more difficult for him even to enter into the recording studio. It had become more difficult prior to that. And so, you know, it's terrible to see somebody with such a gift who was incapable of enjoying that gift in a sense for himself. He did enjoy, I think, performing for the public and the response he got. But but I guess the main thing, to get back to your question, he gave his all to the music, and he saw what he had to say as being of real importance. So yeah, I think he had a sense of his own significance, and he had no apologies to make about the music that he made because he felt it so strongly.
Before writing the book, you certainly had an idea of who Elvis was, and when you finished the book, this idea of yours changed in any way? You found out a person you wasn't expecting.
I don't have a good answer for that. I mean, I found that my views changed in every way and in no ways. I mean, to me, it's a question. It's almost the way Elvis would sing a song. He would get deeper and deeper into it to where he would find a deeper meaning in it. And that's quite a different way, for example, than Jerry Lee Lewis, where every time he would sing a song, it became a different song. He just, and with Elvis, listening to the alternate takes, listening to him, you see him get deeper and deeper into it. For me, the facts didn't change, but my understanding of the facts changed, and my understanding of the connections and the context, above all the context. So even when I was dealing with the most familiar material, it took on new meaning because I came to understand more and more the context in which it took place, the world in which it took place, the choices that were being made. So I don't want to say it was a revolution. I mean, I hope that for me, each of the books I've written, and often the profiles that I write, the shorter profiles, it's like I'll try to just completely immerse myself in the material. And at a certain point, I feel like it clicks. And then from that point on, and it sounds like it's easy, and this is an oversimplification because it's never easy. But from that point on, what I wanted to do from the beginning is to try as much as possible to write from the inside out. So what I was interested in was telling the story of Elvis as he experienced it and as he must have felt it from the inside out. Same with Sam Cooke, same with Sam Phillips, same with Bobby Blue Bland or Dick Curlis in the new book I've written. It's just trying to not to be the outsider, not to be the theorizer, trying to feel what the person you're writing about feels, and not to write about it from the standpoint, oh, I got to put this in because this was important to me. It doesn't matter what's important to me. It's what's important. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And well, I almost finishing here. You certainly know about the new Elvis movie, and you collaborated you had any collaboration in this movie?
No. I mean, when you say I know about it, I've heard about it as you have and as lots of people have, but no, I don't have any.
Are you excited to watch it?
Sure. I'm excited to watch it, but it'll be a Baz Luhrmann movie more than, from my perspective. I've seen a lot of Baz Luhrmann movies, and they're movies that have been made by a person with a particular perspective that I think permeates each of the movies he's made. So in watching the trailer, I was excited by Austin, what's the name of the Austin who plays Elvis?
Austin Butler. Butler.
I mean, from those brief moments, he seemed great, and he was great in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Mm-hmm. I thought he was phenomenal in that. Another great movie, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And when your book about Colonel will come out?
I think not for another couple of years.
A couple of years, okay.
I'm hoping to start writing on it within the next few weeks, and but I would say it's doubtful that it'll be out for a couple of years. But it's just as well. I mean, I think people. I hope that the Baz Luhrmann movie will create a lot of excitement about Elvis. It may be his perspective, I'm sure, is not the same as mine, but it hopefully it'll create excitement about the music. And it would be terrible to have the Colonel book come out right at that time and saying, no, you got the Colonel all wrong. Here's I want my book about the Colonel to, stand on its own, stand for itself. And so hopefully the movie will create more interest in the Colonel. And if the portrait of the Colonel that I present in the book is very different from the one in the movie, well, great. I mean, then people can absorb it and make up their own minds, and but I wouldn't want to say, here's my answer to the movie. That would be silly.
Sure. Well, Mr. Peter. Well, Peter, I really like to thank you for your time, for talking to me. It's a great honor to talk to you. I'm a big fan, and I'm really anxious to read your new book about Colonel Parker.
Well, thanks. I've really enjoyed this. Odair, right?
Am I got it right? Yeah.
Yes. I love the name and the pronunciation. But no, I've really enjoyed it, and it shouldn't be any honor to you. It should be an equal honor. We should be honored, together.
I think you're a master.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it. But it's really been great. And man, I want to, I had the Sam Phillips biography came out in Ukraine several years ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I really wanted, my grandparents came from Ukraine, and I thought, well, this would be, I was really excited to have this Ukrainian edition, but I'm really excited to have this Brazilian edition. And
sure.
Probably more likely at this point that I'll get to visit Brazil than Ukraine, I guess. But
it would be great. It would be great. It would be an honor to meet you personally.
Well, I really enjoyed it, and I appreciate it, and I appreciate your your commitment on your own to the subject and to to the music, and it's been great.
I'm an Elvis fan. I can't deny that.
Well, it's great to meet you. Even virtually, it's great to meet you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very, very much.
Okay, well, great to talk to you.
Really appreciate it.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.